Cool, I guess we're about ready to go. Last thought on a Friday. Let's go, let's do this real quick. Hi, I'm Ben. I've been working in the industry for a while. I've made a bunch of games I can't really talk about. Cerebral Fix is mostly contract work. And I'm a designer, so I approach this from a creative perspective. I thought I'd start the talk with a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't think there's anything wrong with just making games for the fun of making games, and everyone should do it. But this is kind of a talk catered towards people who are, just starting out in the industry. They want this to be their job for like 30, 40, 50 years, their whole life. It's for people who maybe start with one strong skill, they've just finished their training, and they want to kind of broaden those skills. So they might have, design skills like me, and they want, marketing, production. And it's for someone who, needs help sustaining the development of their projects, and they're constantly starting new things all the time, which basically means the talk is for me 10 years ago. So when I started with this talk, I kind of submitted the name for it, and then I went out and started doing research. The idea that I had was to bridge this gap that I think exists between the creative and business sides. I thought these were sort of two different people, and they don't really sort of click together. But as soon as I started doing the research, I found out that this isn't really true, and that the people who survive in the industry, they have this mix of skills, right? Like, a lot of CEOs come from programming backgrounds, right? And to give a couple of examples of this, I have Satoru Iwata and Lucas Pope. So Satoru Iwata on the left there, the ex-CEO of Nintendo, sadly passed away a few years ago, actually started out in the industry as a programmer. So he worked on Earthbound, he worked on Kirby, and he gets his big foot in the door moment when Nintendo wanted a golf game to be made. And they send it out to the vendors, and the vendors say, we can't do this, the courses won't fit on the NES. And Satoru Iwata says, hold my Mario, I can do this. And he invents these compression algorithms that let the courses go on the NES, and he forms this relationship with Nintendo. And they actually use his compression algorithms like years later when they're making Pokemon Gold and Silver. Not to make the games smaller, but to make them decompress the assets quicker. So, years on, he's still having an effect. And Lucas Pope, I think, sort of maybe viewed from a different angle as this kind of indie darling. I think he's one of the best creatives in the world. Made 2 games back-to-back that did just really, really good. But this happens a long time into his career. He actually starts off making Quake mods, and he starts a company called Ratloop Games with his buddies at uni. And, they do business for a while, they do some stuff with Activision, and the company goes under. So he then spends like a few years working at other places like Naughty Dog, and it's 15 years into his career that he does this. So by this time, he already has, business skills. He's already been around the block. And so sort of my theory on how this kind of happens is you sort of start off your career as, you've trained in one thing, and that's the thing that you want to kind of perfect, right? So I'm a designer, I want to do design. And you get immersed in this industry, and you start sort of picking up these perspectives from different people, and you're able to analyze your decisions from their perspective. So for instance, you might be an artist, and you might start just to export your assets as powers of 2 to make the programmers happy, or in certain formats, right, or named certain ways. As a designer, you might start being more conscious of the scope of your decisions and how that impacts the people around you. And of course, later in development, you are distributing your game to people with even more perspectives. So players, reviewers, distributors, and you start picking up on their perspectives on certain things as well. So to give you an idea of this sort of ability to analyze decisions from different perspectives, I've got this game, Cruelty Squad. So I think this is a really good example to analyze from an aesthetic point of view. And you can kind of start off by going, Cruelty Squad looks like a drug-fueled fever dream. This is really, really cool. I want to make that. That's awesome. And that's fine. You can do that, and I encourage you to just, make games because they're cool. But we can also take this and analyze it on a deeper level. This creative decision. What does it mean from a production standpoint? Well, the textures are brightly colored, and the assets are low poly, and this game was made by one person. So when you do something like that, you're reducing the production burden on yourself, which is a really good thing to do. And you can analyze it from a different level as well. This is a kind of marketing level. So the game is an immersive sim, and the immersive sim genre is a fairly niche one with a very dedicated fan base. And so you're kind of counting on these players discovering your game organically, which is quite useful if you are a single developer, you don't really have a marketing budget. They're also the sort of audience that are dedicated and they won't bounce off a product quite so quickly, which is really good for a game that looks like that, right? You need to get through the first kind of initial jarring experience before you can really get into that game. And so I think kind of everybody has these skills to analyze, creative decisions from a business perspective and the other way around. And I think it's just a question of like, how fast do you develop the ability to analyze these things from different skill sets? But if not, like, how can you generate these skills fast? How can you accelerate yourself? How can you turn like a decade's worth of learning into a few years kind of thing? So I've got a few kind of small points, 4 sort of big ones. I know Ted already talked about this, but make small games. I think this is such a useful thing to do because it accelerates this whole process of collecting feedback from different points of view to a very short iterative cycle. And it's not just a good creative decision, it's not just a good learning decision, you also generate these products that can actually be business viable things. So you can make a demo, that demo can go up on Steamfest, and next thing you know, you might have publisher leverage, right, to get a deal. You can make a game jam game, and sometimes that can turn into a full product. These games on the side here, Binding of Isaac, Surgeon Simulator, Sacrifices Must Be Made, all game jam games, all got turned into like a proper product. Sacrifices Must Be Made got turned into a game called Inscription. The second thing I encourage people to do, especially from a design perspective, is make games for other people. This lets you get into different perspectives, obviously, really quickly, and it also alleviates this thing of this bias that you inherently have towards things that you like. I couldn't find very good examples of like people saying, I made this game for a specific individual. Lucas Pope, this is his latest game, this is Mars After Midnight, he made this for his kids. And there's a lot of talk about Animal Crossing and the philosophy of getting the whole family playing this one game, but not at the same time, right? So you can stick a kid in front of Animal Crossing and they will go and do stuff. You can stick an adult in front of Animal Crossing and they'll be able to play. And they'll be able to form these kind of relationships within the game and all these sort of subjects of conversation and things like that. It also gets you out of this thing of I like this thing and I want to make this thing. And it's important because the things that you like and the things that you can make are often quite different. So you might like Magic the Gathering, but doing your own Magic the Gathering set is a really hard thing to do by yourself. So if you start making games for other people, you're more encouraged to do something that fits within a box that you can do. Market research. We didn't do this at Cerebral Fix for a very, very long time. And it doesn't need to be super complicated, right? Like you don't need to pay $50,000 for data from all of the mobile market, right? You can just go to subreddits, you can go to Steam pages, and you can start listening to the people who play this sort of game that you want to make. Because that will give you an idea of what their problems are within that genre and how you can fix them. So Palworld, really good example. They took this idea of Nintendo not aging their games with the audience, and they threw guns into Pokemon. It worked, right? It's a really good idea. Right up until Nintendo came at them with a lawsuit, right before this talk was made. So it also sort of gets you into this thinking of your unique selling point as well. The idea of like, why will someone play my game over someone else's? If we go back to Cruelty Squad as an example, like your aesthetic is a huge selling point in your game and you need it to differentiate from games like Prey, right, or Thief. So yeah, it keeps, it just makes some basic decision making really easy when you do that. And then sort of the last point I want to make about this is this thing called serendipity bias, which is a name I made up for it. If anyone knows if it's got a technical name, let me know. But it's just the tendency to emulate stuff that you really like. So you see something cool, you might like Minecraft, you're going to go make a Minecraft game. And this can be a really good thing, but it also has a few pitfalls. There's often some form of luck involved in those like 1% games. And they are 1% games. 10% of games make over $200,000. So, and that earnings graph is exponential. So it's very hard to follow a game like Minecraft, or Stardew Valley is another good example. And they often have some form of serendipity. Among Us launched 2 years before a global pandemic, and it wasn't until the global pandemic that it really took off, right? And that's not a business factor you can really replicate. So you need to, well, you shouldn't replicate it. So you need to sort of parse things like that out of a game's equation and ask yourself, will their strategy work for me? Will it work twice? Another good example of this is Stardew Valley. This launched at a time when the Stardew IP, the Harvest Moon IP, sorry, split in two. So Natsumi take the IP, the name Harvest Moon, and another company take the developers. And so at the point Stardew Valley launches, the Harvest Moon name is kind of the worst it's ever been, right? So it launches into this market, and it takes advantage of its competitors' decline. And that's not a situation you can engineer. So, yeah, when you're learning from these games, these people, they often get invited to conferences like these, and they often have a really good success story. Just sort of parse out the bits that you think won't work twice. And I encourage people to go and look for people who give talks from those who haven't had a massive hit. Does anyone in the room know who Jake Burkett is? Oh, not a single soul. I love this. He has written, he does my favorite GDC talk of all time, and it's called 11 Years Without a Hit. And all it is him talking about like the games he's made and how he's managed to survive and build an income and support his family, never making a game that sort of did more than $50,000, right? So he has a bunch of games, they all have long tails, and each game just makes a tiny bit of money, and it all adds up to this supportable income stream. Which leads nicely on to this idea of sustainability, right? Like, how are you going to keep yourself going 5, 10, 15 years? Is your idea to take like 2 years of savings, make a game, and then go back to work if it doesn't succeed? Or are you thinking longer term and you want to kind of build this thing out, right? There are two parts to this. Financial sustainability is only half of it, and creative sustainability, I think, is just as important. It's this idea of like not burning out and then just leaving the games industry forever, which I think is still, even today, quite a major thing. There's a real great quote. Look at that, it's Fez. So Phil Fish, I'm burnt out, like literally, yeah. I've been burnt out for years. I feel a little bit sick, feel a little bit depressed. It's horrible. It really sucks. Like classic burnout. So how do you mitigate this? How do you keep those creative juices flowing? Well, sourcing your ideas. It's quite common for you to have like writer's block or creative block. So how do you keep these new ideas flowing in? The best piece of advice I've heard in this regard is just to have hobbies outside of gaming. Just go do stuff that's not gaming, and the best ideas will come from those sorts of things. The best example I have is of Pokemon. So Satoshi Tajiri, when he was a kid, he would go out into the fields around his house in Japan, and he would catch bugs, and he would catalog them in a notebook his parents bought for him. All right, and so he wanted to share this idea with the world, this fun that he had, and Pokemon was born. Another member of that team, Junichi Masuda, did the music for the original Pokemon games, and he was heavily inspired by like techno and classical music. And there's actually a really good video on YouTube that you can go and find where they get composers to try and determine whether a piece of music is from Mozart or if it's from Pokemon. And it's a lot harder than you would think it would be, because those influences are really strong. So yeah, you go find other things to draw ideas from, and those ideas don't need to be the best. Untitled Goose Game started off as a picture of a goose in a chat, right? And that was a really good idea. That was a successful idea. So something can be as simple as that and still be good. And I threw this in here because it's just my favorite thing at the moment. So as far as hobbies go, I think this is just extreme. The guy who invented the Xbox, Seamus Blakely, he just likes to make bread, but he like dials it up to 11. He got these Egyptian urns, he got the yeast out of these urns, and like made 4,500-year-old Egyptian sourdough bread. So yeah, go make bread. There's another part to this creative sustainability, this idea that sort of, a month, 2 months into your project, you're going to run out of steam. And the way I like to think of it, creativity is your booster stage. It's going to get you partway to orbit, but it will run out. And it will run out on every single project you do. And you need to find a way of pushing through that and keeping on going. Because you will find another boost as soon as you're getting close to the deadline, close to the end of your project, sorry, and you can see it, right? So this is something, you can't prescribe to people. How do you push through this? But the way I do it is I bribe myself with creative endeavors. So I have a main project, and before I work on the cool, interesting, creative project that I want to do, I have to boot up my main project and do 5 minutes on it. And sometimes it's 5 minutes, but often I will boot up the project and spend half an hour working on it. And that just keeps me going on that main project. I also write ideas down. So if I think something would be really, really cool and I'd rather work on that, I'll put it into a Trello board and I'll just sit on it for 2 to 3 days. And often after that amount of time, that idea doesn't seem as interesting. And I can get back to work on the main thing. So yeah, another example I have here, Stardew Valley. It took 6 years or something to make that game, and the creator redid the portraits 10 times. And I imagine probably by the 5th time that stops being as interesting, and you just kind of have to push through. And there's also this other thing, I don't think it gets talked about a huge amount, but there comes a point where you have to start sharing your game with other people, and there's a lot of fear there. I think that's a real sort of stopping point for people. It's, this fear of like, oh, my game's going to get ripped to shreds. It's fear of, it's bad, I coded it badly. And it can lead you to making bad decisions like abandoning your project, right? And so I just throw a couple of examples of quote-unquote bad games. One of them is Undertale, which did very, very well. And that is a picture of the source code of Undertale and all of its dialogue, which is in a single gigantic switch statement. So if Undertale can do something like that, it doesn't matter how you code your game, right? It can still be successful. Another one, Eric Barone, once again, Stardew Valley. It's just a beautiful case study. The relevant bit is at the end there. After working on it for 6 years, I didn't even have an objective sense of if the game was good. I thought it was bad, right? Stardew Valley. He thought it was bad. So this is kind of just a natural part of games. Like these feelings are not unusual, and they're not right either. Like, just don't fall into that trap of thinking that you're terrible, because even the best games do, right? Once again, here's fears. We move on to financial sustainability. How are we going to keep going from the money side, right? I love fears because, yeah, you get the quotes like this, we'd completely run out of money, and the project was about to die. And then Trapdoor came along and funded it, so they were this close to basically, falling off the face of the earth and never getting released. So it's all about income streams, it's all about diversifying your revenue. The best advice that I found from doing research on this was build taps. Build lots of different income streams because they're way more resistant to disaster than just having one thing that you do. So a good example of this is that Cerebral Fix was one of the few companies that did not do well over COVID, because a lot of our work was tied up in physical installations. And so when a global pandemic came along, physical locations closed, the work went away. And if we'd diversified a bit more, we could have maybe prevented that. So there's a lot of things you can do in games to do this. You don't just need to make games, you could translate games. You could port games. CD Projekt were really good at this. This is how they started. They did software and they translated games into Polish, right? And it's important to do this, to prepare for this, because your first game isn't likely to be the one that makes you $1 million. Angry Birds was not Rovio's first game. It was not their 10th game. It was not their 25th game. It was their 50th game, right? So sometimes you just need to push yourself do those projects to get to that one that's going to be the hit. Another example, Edward Hopper, famous American artist, did Nighthawks, spends 15 years of his career doing magazine covers. And he didn't like that, but it kind of kept him going. It let him practice his craft and stay in that, that industry. One other piece of advice that I have for this is, once again, this idea that Jack Burkett talks about, games have a long tail. Even 10 years after release, a game can be making a little bit of money, and it's worth putting a bit of effort into supporting those old releases just so that that money keeps flowing. Another thing I've seen people do that do this really, really well is just formulating plans upon plans upon plans. And it's really just thinking more broadly than I'm going to spend 2 years making a game and see what happens. It's about thinking about the different levels of success that you can achieve and what your plan is at each of those levels. So once again, that statistic, 10% of games make over $200,000. So what are you going to do if your game makes $100,000 or $10,000? Have a plan in there. Think about your product, how much you're willing to sell at different levels, or whether you want to go find a publisher. This is a thing that there's no hard answer on. I haven't been able to tell if people have said, yes, this is good, no, this is bad. It's completely independent on the game and on the publisher and on the deal. So people know generally that a publisher is going to take a huge chunk of your game, and they're all going to recoup the amount that they take in different ways. So some publishers are going to want to recoup their marketing costs. Others are going to give you like a little bit of money as they recoup their costs. Others are going to take money after they've finished recouping their costs in different amounts, and you just need to read all of those different deals and try to find one that's suitable for you. If you don't want a publisher, it still might be a good idea to send your game out to these people anyway, because a publisher doesn't sugarcoat their feedback. They're not going to give you money if they don't think your game is good. So you can get some really good, honest feedback from publishers. If you don't get any responses, maybe keep working on your game. If you get 10, maybe think about going solo, right? And yeah, good publishers have a good audience and brand. Is kind of another reason that you want it. Like if that Annapurna logo is on a game, that's hugely valuable to you. So that's maybe one reason you might want to publish it. But maybe you don't. Maybe you're thinking more about pitching. This could be for something like code. This could be for an RFP, work for hire. And you kind of need to treat this the same way you treat a game, which is this idea of like, why is someone going to choose my pitch over anyone else's? What are you including in that pitch that's going to make the publisher look at it and go, yeah, this company. It could be just some amazing key art or a trailer, or even including like a prototype with it that makes you stand out from the other 9 people or 10 people or 100 people doing that RFP. Another thing we're thinking about with publishing is what country they come from. If you're being paid in American dollars, that's like twice as much as being paid in like Australian dollars, right? And this kind of works both ways. Publishers used to come to New Zealand a lot more than they do now because we were a very cheap place to make games. But post-COVID, there are these teams that are decentralized, and we are no longer the cheapest place to make games, right? Those decentralized teams have lower costs, and so we've lost that advantage in certain ways. And just be aware that if you are going for this stuff, most pitches don't end up getting signed, right? We call this Death Valley within our company, but it's basically this space of the publisher doesn't want to say no to you, but they're not wanting to actually sign, and nothing is certain until it's signed. So just be aware of this. Be aware that it costs you time and money to do this, and even after you've done this, if you are successful, you now have a bunch of new problems that you have to work through. So everyone wants to make games. Competing for work where you actually make games is really hard. So you can think about other things that you can do as well, right? That translating games, that porting games sort of stuff. CD Projekt, once again, really good at this. Another good example is Sonic Mania. So Christian Whitehead, the guy who did that, started off by porting Sonic games to mobile. So he understood the Sega hardware really well, and he did this for a while, and he got this opportunity to make Sonic Mania. A client in itself is another sort of danger you have to juggle. It's usually a full-time job because they're never going to be quite happy with what they signed. So managing that relationship is just a huge task. And knowing when to put your foot down and say, well, no, we're not going to do that. Knowing how to deprioritize certain things and put other things first, important skill to have. And it only sometimes builds your reputation. This is the thing I don't think people really think about, but software does not build your cred in the game space, right? Certain companies aren't going to let you put your name on a product. So if you can't get your name on it, if you can't talk about it, that doesn't build your cred. On the flip side of that, there are benefits. The obvious one is money, right? You want to keep going, you want to make this your career, keeps you afloat. But there's more to it than that. Right? Someone else is paying on their dime for you to learn, and you will learn. Those relationships don't just stay with a company, they are with a person. And the person can change companies. So someone who works for a small-time publisher might get a job at Marvel. You now have a contact at Marvel, right? That's a huge benefit. You might be able to keep the code you write. Not usually, but if a project is cancelled, make sure it's explicit that you get to keep the code, because this can be a real huge thing for you. So once again, back to CD Projekt, they were working on a Baldur's Gate game, and the Baldur's Gate game got cancelled, and that's how The Witcher was born. Everyone's favorite plumber, Mario, it's the same thing. They were working on a Popeye game. The Popeye game got cancelled, and you can see it in Donkey Kong, right? Mario's Popeye, Pauline is Olive Oil, and the monkey is the bad guy, I can't remember his name. But yeah, this can be born out of those sorts of things can be born out of these failures, these cancelled projects, which makes it really ironic what they're doing to Power World right now. And of course, work for hire can lead to some really unforgettable experiences. Can't talk about them, but yeah, do cool things, traveling to cool places. Sort of the final point here is be wary of advice. It decays quickly in this industry. Within usually about 10 years, like, the advice is out of date, even this advice. And new technologies are constantly appearing and disappearing. Does anyone know what renderware is? You know what renderware is? Yep. So there are a few people who know what it is. It was basically described as Sony's DirectX. Right, so that sort of level of importance, and it kind of got dissolved into EA internally and disappeared overnight. Like, this happens all the time, and it happened with Flash. Everyone remembers Flash, and we know what Unity did, and we will see what happens to them. And yeah, new ways to game will always emerge. I was around for when it was Facebook games and then it was mobile games. And so if you can get on the ground floor of that sort of thing, it can be a huge, jump start to your career. So to sum up, there's not really a barrier between those two skill sets, creative and business. If you're doing it well, you're applying your skills across the board. If you want to train those skills, make small games for other people. I equate this to doing sort of music studies instead of jumping into your favorite song when you start guitar and then bouncing off of it, right? A music study is designed to teach you like one specific thing. It can be scales or arpeggios or just like fingering, and that sort of stuff builds your ability, game development ability. And just make games sustainably. I would rather people make games creatively sustainable than anything else, and just treat themselves with kindness. And try to think, ahead 5, 10, 15 years. And finally, I just want to thank Callum, Nadia, Tim, and Navi for helping me with this talk and giving me all of the good business advice. So that's it. How did I do on time? Have you got time for questions? Couple minutes. I won't keep you too long. I know what it's like. Anybody?
Hey, so any advice on how to say probably
Yeah, that's a real good one. I'm not super huge on the sales side, but building your credibility as a company is super important. Like I said, sort of Cerebral Fix's name didn't go on a lot of the projects we made, so we're spending a lot of time now trying to market ourselves and build material that represents us as a company, so that we can actually go out and sell. There are sites that sort of advertise these requests for proposals and stuff, but I'm sort of not the person to talk to about that. Maybe Simon or Jed would sort of know a bit more about that. He's down there, Simon. No more? Cool. Go have a break. It's been a long day.